Okay, hey everybody. I'm here with one of my dear friends, Dr. Mike Mantel, who is the CEO of Living Water International. You guys know here at the Crossing how big a deal this partnership is with us. So first of all, Mike, thanks for joining us, and I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Greg, I am so happy to be here with you today. I wish I was there in person, but you know how it goes.
Me too, but you will be soon. I mean, I believe that. I do. So here we are. I can't believe it, but we're entering into the Advent season, and our folks obviously are very familiar with Advent conspiracy. And I thought maybe what we could do is just kind of zero in on that last tenet of love all and what that means for us at the Crossing. And honestly, since it's just us and we're kind of talking with family now, what it means for this strategic partnership between the Crossing and LWI. You and I were talking at Corporate Faith where you were recently, and we were just talking about how this partnership has changed both of us. Would you just kind of unpack that a little bit?
I would love to. You know, we've been doing this now for what, 13 years?
Yes, unbelievable.
Yeah. And well, first of all, Advent conspiracies impacted me personally, and has impacted the organization Living Water International. I, like everybody else that follows Jesus, wants to worship Jesus at Christmas, right? And Advent conspiracy gave me permission, kind of in a cool way, to worship the King and to not be caught in the frenzy of consumerism. I mean, it provided a little space personally. And in my role as the CEO and president of Living Water International, the people that I've engaged with through Advent Conspiracy has changed how we do our work and the impact of our work. How we do our work, I got to tell you, Greg, 360 churches that had not previously understood the water crisis are engaged in missions around the world because of this crazy idea that you and a couple of your friends had to make Christmas more approachable for people. 360 churches.
Yeah, when you engaged, I mean, they're in. It's not all of those other churches that are, and we're grateful for them, that are contributing. I mean, these are churches that are engaging with you guys in pushing back darkness.
They are going on trips, or will again, Lord willing, soon. They are understanding the impact of water, that the impact that we have on kids, on women, communities. For the first time, they're understanding the enormous impact of the lack of water that people experience around the world. And it's an invitation to understand and to get involved. 360 churches. I think, I did a little calculation. We have, through Advent Conspiracy, only through Living Water International, have impacted probably 350,000 lives with water in the gospel.
Well, one of the things that I remember us talking about early on was that let's just call it the funding of what is happening. You felt like churches need to be more involved with the water crisis. And so we've seen that over these years. But we've also seen here on our side, Mike, that it's changed us. I think we're a church that is as aware of the water crisis as most churches are. And like you were saying, it starts to affect every aspect of life in that particular village, in that particular school. And I'm thinking back to a couple of years ago when we went back to Liberia to really one of the first wells that Chris C., our buddy, he and I were in Liberia all those years ago at the very beginning of Advent Conspiracy. And it was a tough place where we were, and we sort of vowed in that moment, whether this AC thing takes off or not, by God's grace, we want there to be a well here. And so you and I got a chance to go back and to visit that exact village. We weren't sure if we were going to get there, but as I walked further and further into the village, it became apparent we were in the same village, but there were differences. You want to talk about that time when we walked into that village?
I, I remember that walk so clearly. We were walking up that dirt path, and you're just like, this kind of looks familiar. Have we been here before?
Yeah.
I think right around this bend, we're going to see this tree, and the river's good. And I mean, the energy just started growing. And when you realized fully that we had, in fact, been in that place 10 years prior, it really was overwhelming because you told me the story. It was Chief Barney, and you'll tell the story much better than me, but
Yeah.
this chief was angry. And you and Chris and Rick were there to do good, to be a blessing, to bring water, and you could not get any positive reaction from that chief. Can you tell me why that was?
Yeah. Well, it really, we just said, and we thought we were kind of excited about, hey, there will be a well here. We're going to start this thing. We're going to go back to our churches, and there will be a well here providing fresh water for you. And this was right on the heels of them telling us that there were children like that week that had died, that there were children who were dying of these waterborne diseases. So we thought we were bringing a good thing, a bit of good news to it. And like you said, it was just a flat reaction, just nothing. And so then through the translator, we asked him, so, are we, what are we missing here? And he said, I will never forget this. He said, others have made promises in the name of Jesus before you, and nothing has ever happened. And honestly, Mike, Chris and I looked at each other and said, you know what, if this AC thing doesn't take off at all, we are guaranteeing between our two churches that a well will be dug here, because we just didn't want the great name of Jesus dug through the mud with people making empty promises anymore. And so it was fun to go back and to see that not only had the promise been kept, but all of the things that happened in the life of that village because of what happened back then.
That was such a courageous act. And
Mm,
that's often where we are. Will we just move forward and make a commitment without knowing the impact? And then 10 years later to see that the children were in fact going to school. They had uniforms. There were church buildings.
yeah.
People were healthy.
Yes.
And it had become so normal to that community 10 years later that they were taking water as just a given.
Yeah.
They'd forgotten that water had not previously been available there. And so when I asked them, we're sitting around having tea, sitting around the water point. It was still a center part of the village, the hand pump. And I asked the elders, I said, so how are you feeling today? What is the biggest overwhelming feeling, the impact that you have right now? And I thought they would say, the water that came 10 years ago. Do you remember what they said?
No, honestly, I don't. My head was so full of things and so many conversations. What did he say?
This old man, he must have been 85 years old.
I remember.
He's
I
over,
remember it.
he moves his head like this towards you, and he said, that white man from America is sitting around this water point with me drinking tea. He said, that has never happened before. And I'm like, the water and the reconciliation, the living gospel of Jesus Christ, all coming together in that moment. It was overwhelming.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I do remember that moment. I don't remember him specifically saying that. I remember him taking me by the hand, and it was really important for us to sit there and to have that tea. And then you guys had that conversation. I remember how loud the village was with kids giggling, running around. And I remember that church building that had been built in the last decade, and the worship service that lasted, I mean, how many of these have you and I been in around the world? And they're just so beautiful. But that worship service that lasted a while,
Yeah.
with singing and praising and storytelling. Mike, it's just, for us personally at our church, it's a blessing, and we keep learning more about the kingdom of God by getting involved in these ways. So I just want to say thank you to you for really just providing that avenue for us to partner together and to see God at work in ways that we honestly never imagined. I want to ask you something now. Speaking of unimaginable moments, 2020's been a year, and so I can only imagine that we have folks that are joining us really for the first time this Advent season. And I've got two questions for you, and one of them is really specific to COVID, and I want to come back to that. But the first question is, what would you say to someone who is joining us maybe for the first time this Advent season? They're going to hear from the rest of us, but what would you say to them about jumping into this conspiracy with us?
I would just want the new person to know that God is active and alive, and he is inviting us into his work, and it's real. The invitation to participate across the globe and transform lives, it's real. There are real people, real wells, real kids, real training, and we're no longer limited to just want to do something someday. You know, maybe when we get a little older, maybe when we get a little bit more money, maybe when we get a little bit more time, because of our relationships, our global partnership, our network of churches around the world. An individual in St. Louis can transform the lives of an individual in Kerr City, Maine. I mean, just immediately. And it's possible, it's real, and we can tap into, well, the Advent conspiracy. We're preparing for Jesus to come. We're worshiping fully, and we can do so with our brothers and sisters around the world. It's not a scam, it's a real deal, and it's divinely inspired.
Yeah. And you bring up something that is so important, and it'll lead us into this next question. But first, uh, this partnership really is, and we've mentioned it, but it really is about it's about water, but it's about so much more. And I appreciate your leadership in this sector of water and what it means to the world, because we hear a lot. There are famous people and actors and all sorts of folks that will say, "Hey, water, this is the thing," and we've been saying that for years. But what I love is how you guys have come alongside the local church stateside, because you guys are blessing us and helping us to connect to the kingdom in new ways. But can you talk for just a minute about how you all are coming alongside and championing the local church in places like Zimbabwe, which is really near and dear to our hearts, and really India and Central America and Haiti? Can you talk about what LWI is doing to empower and resource local churches around the world as they're providing clean water?
It's absolutely true that water is the fundamental intervention in our development. It's true, it's physical. With water comes life. With surplus water comes food. Surplus food provides economic access and education. There's a building. It's water by itself is a multiplier. It changes lives. Fantastic. We love people. We want people to have full lives. But living water transforms our souls, transforms our minds now and eternity. And so this whole idea of blessing someone with water, that's great. It's cool. It's admirable. But putting our resources in the hands of a local pastor who's preceded us in that community, who's responding to God's call to bless that community, to invite people to follow Jesus, getting behind that pastor with our resources equips that pastor to share the living water, to be visible and relevant in their communities, inviting people in to know Jesus. And so, like, all of our work is behind the local church, the district church, the national church. We're aligning everything we do so that the church becomes the primary change agent in this area of water access, sanitation, and hygiene wherever we work, because then the blessing continues in this, and the gospel of Jesus Christ gets proclaimed and lived out forever.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, I said one more question, but you keep just reminding me of other ways that God is at work. Can we talk for just a second here about the doors that God has opened? And I believe we're still walking through those doors, but the doors that God has opened in Africa, when you started to talk about local and district and national organizations of churches and denominations, uh, I think, Mike, tell me if you agree with this or not, but I think that through our relationship and through what you all did in Zimbabwe in particular, God opened the door and we walked through something that is actually now, uh, the crossing is getting a chance with you to resource churches around really the entire continent of Africa. And can you talk a little bit about that and just that association of national organizations in Africa? And Mike, I think God just led us to something that is going to continue to grow in the decades to follow. Can you explain a little bit of that?
I think God has been calling you, pastor, your elders, your board, the members of the churches and the campuses for years. And when you and the body of the crossing responded to your heart call to respond to poverty issues around water in Zimbabwe, you just invited Living Water to come along with. And because we're committed to serve the local church, we said, well, that's part of our calling. Let's get behind what the crossing is doing. We don't fully understand it. I remember asking you, you better be sure that God's calling you, because Zimbabwe is not an easy place to be, right? And we started working with local churches in communities, inviting those local churches to do water access, sanitation, and hygiene. But we did so through a denominational association called the Evangelical Fellowship of Zimbabwe. Now, these friends are wired in at the community level, at the district level, and at the national level, and they are smart leaders. And they came up with a model that was so good as far as starting with a modeling church and having that church equip other churches. That became the path that we've implemented globally. They called it the SOLI model, salt and light. We call it the flourish model, but it grew out of just both of our organizations' obedience to God's leading. Then it's kind of funny because we can't see what God is doing in different places, but the head of the Evangelical Fellowship in Zimbabwe became the leader of the National Association of Evangelicals in Africa. The crossing, through your leadership and writing the book, The Genius of One, moved us towards equipping churches more broadly. And before we knew it, we had banquet halls full of 1,000 church pastors from 12 countries, heads of states, denominational leaders, praying for forgiveness for not working together and dreaming of working together. We start with a little water in the community, which is life-saving, eternally saving. And God is using that to organize churches across countries and across the continent. And I cannot wait to see where this goes.
No, me either, Mike. And it is that whole chain reaction thing where we start with something and then only God really knows where all of this is leading. But when you mention those nations really in Southern Africa and West Africa and East Africa, we are learning from them, just like we're learning from you. Every time we're involved with these churches, we come back and we're learning more about how to live out our faith and how to build bridges and what reconciliation looks like. And I'm just grateful that we get to do this together. But in this year of so many strange challenges, the pandemic has certainly it's changed a lot of things, but one of the things that it's underscored is how God is still at work, and he's not overwhelmed or intimidated by this pandemic. Can you talk a little bit now about how WASH programs are uniquely, we were at Living Water and our partnership together, we were, I think, uniquely ready to enter into this moment to help people in all of the ways we're talking about in 2020 with COVID, a very real thing in places around the world. Can you talk about how a WASH program is just so specifically uh, a part of how we've been giving life to people around the world in this pandemic?
So all of us know that we need to wash our hands, wear masks, and socially distance ourselves, right? That we all know that.
Yep.
Now, most places where we work, they don't have access to water. They don't have access to soap. And they get crazy information that moves politically and through the media. And so all we needed to do was to tell the basic truth. What is it that we know about COVID-19? How do we protect ourselves as best as we can from COVID-19? How do we access supplies to do that? And who are the truth tellers that the community will believe? Which of course is the local church.
Right.
And the local church began to access their relationships in radio, in TV. They introduced us at health centers and at district gatherings and assemblies. And pretty soon, this body, this organic body of the church, using the basic truths that God has already equipped us with as far as the virus and the tools to fight the virus. And we ended up reaching through 5,000 churches, 5 million people with COVID-19 messages. 445 health centers got equipment. What was it about? 170,000 people got access to personal hygiene resources, all because God had been planting us through the local church, organizing us across countries, improving our technical communications. So in the moment when COVID was raging and fear and restrictions were overwhelming, we were prepared with relational networks, technology, and knowledge to serve the church in that moment.
To God be the glory, man. Every time you tell that story, it's like, I hate what we're going through, but I am so grateful for a sovereign God who saw it coming and has called his church to work together as one. And really, a long time ago, um, allowed my path to cross your path and Living Water's path. And Mike, I'm so grateful we get to do this together. We are so grateful that you are leading Living Water International the way you are. You know, our friend Rick would say we're one day closer to seeing each other face to face. I can't wait for you to come up here and to be with us and to tell some of these stories face to face. But I'm really grateful in this Advent season that you took the time in this technologically, sanctioned way where we can do this on a Zoom call. I just want to say thank you one more time for everything you guys are doing. Thank you for sharing your time with us now. And we say around here that God's not finished with us or this world. I can't wait to see what he does with this partnership and what 2021 and 22 and 23 looks like, because God is still up to something. So love you, brother. Love your team. And thank you so much.
Pastor, thank you. We love the crossing, and we would not be who we are today but for the crossing. So thank you so much.
All right, brother. See you soon.
Bye-bye.